Georgia and Russia are at war. Interesting. Last show we talked about it. I said it was bigger than some people thought it was. I was such a genius. Turns out the wars are bigger than expected. And I'm going to say something a little controversial. So everybody hang on, buckle up, buckle down. Here I come. I think Russia's right. Oh my God, I hope you didn't swerve off the road. Now, here's the deal, right? I don't know if they're morally right. That's a different question. Politically, geopolitically, I understand exactly where they're coming from. Now, Georgia is a U.S. ally, right? In fact, they were the third largest force in Iraq at a comical 2,000 troops. They've all been flown back to Georgia now. Why have they been flown back to Georgia? Because Georgia's now in the middle of a real war, their war, okay? Something they have something to do with. And who flew them back? And this is interesting. The United States of America did. So Georgia's been cozying up to the West. They've been saying, all right, come on, work with us, all right? We're on your team, right? But I'm here to conclude, based on the accounts and the reporting on the ground, Georgia started this war. They went into South Ossetia and started to bomb positions, and according to a lot of accounts, bomb civilians. Russia was waiting for this because there'd been a lot of prodding back and forth. And don't get me wrong, Russia didn't instigate, but poked Georgia over and over and over to see if they can get them to act. And they did, and it was a mistake of theirs. And what Russia did was they came down like a ton of bricks on Georgia. Over 500 tanks sent in, over 20,000 soldiers. I mean, it's not like Russia wasn't ready. They were on the border, right? And they just rolled in, and like we predicted on the last show, they have not stopped. So, why do I think that they are right about this in a couple of ways? All right. Number one, of course, they shouldn't bomb civilians. Number two, they obviously shouldn't go into Georgia. I'm not talking about those moral issues. I'm talking about geopolitics mainly. Number one, Georgia started the war. Well, if you start the war and then you get an ass kicking, well, you partly had it coming, okay? Now, I understand that it has to be proportional and there has to be bounds of reason and you got to pull it back at some point, right? But Russia's giving basically a little lesson here, not just to Georgia, but to its entire sphere of influence, all the former breakaway republics, and to the West as well, saying, hey, listen, if you poke the bear is going to kick your ass. And Russia says, hey, wait a minute. And Vladimir Putin said this today. He said, look, let me get this right. So Saddam Hussein raised a couple of Shiite villages, and we executed it for it, right? Now, the president of Georgia comes into South Ossetia and raises about 10 Russian villages. Now, whether his facts are dead on is a different question, right? He says, but now I'm to let the Georgian president go? He said, no, I'm coming, okay? And now the Russians are hinting at regime change in Georgia, which, of course, we find unacceptable. And this is where propaganda comes into the story. Now, the stories are all a little muddled, because they say, well, I mean, the reporters say on the ground that the Georgians attacked first. On the other hand, government propaganda from the West and the United States says it's the Russians' fault. Okay, but why? What is that propaganda based on other than the Western governments in the United States simply declaring it so because they're an ally of Georgia and they're trying to keep Russia in check? I don't see any evidence behind it, right? So, and the West is outraged, and Bush is outraged. Remember when Bush looked into Vladimir Putin's soul? You remember that? He looked into his eyes and he said, oh, I saw his soul, and he's a good man. I can trust him. And we told you, this was in Ron Suskind's most recent book, actually, where CIA analysts and agents were floored by Bush. They said, you have to understand, Putin is a former KGB agent. Of course you can't look into his eyes and trust him. What do you mean you saw into his soul? They wanted to tap his hotel room in Vienna when Putin was staying there, and Bush wouldn't let them because he saw into Putin's soul. Now, of course, Bush is on the warpath talking about, oh, this Putin guy, I can't believe him. What a terrible guy with these Georgians, etc. But wait a minute, George Bush, this is all your fault. You're the one who said regime change against countries you don't like is perfectly acceptable. First strikes are acceptable. In this case, Georgia did the first strike. And now Russia's striking back. And this is your chickens coming home to roost. Putin is just doing exactly what you told him it was perfectly permissible. And he's like, look, you wanted regime change? I want regime change. This guy, Saddam Hussein, killed different ethnicities within Iraq, and this guy's killing different ethnicities within Southeast Asia. So I'm coming to get him. What are you going to do about it? And there comes the bottom line. Ain't nothing we can do about it, man. What are we going to do? What kind of lesson have we taught the world? And where are we in terms of capital? We don't have any of it. Our threats at this point are completely empty because we're running on empty. Because we spent all of our political and military and diplomatic capital, although we didn't have to try much diplomatic capital at all, but we spent it all in Iraq. We wasted it all in Iraq. And now Putin says, yeah, tell me another one, Bushy. Tell me another one. Finally, before we go to the break, I'm going to remind you of Bush's nickname for Putin, because I can never get enough of this, and people forget it, and it should never be forgotten. His nickname for Vladimir Putin, when the beginning of his first term, was Pooty Poot. Pooty Poot. Now he's surprised that Pooty Poot has rolled in his tanks, and he doesn't know what to do. That's because this president has always been mentally under-equipped.